Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This day will be in 1 Kings 11, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 19. Got the dog. King Solomon fell in love with many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, including Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They came from nations about which the Lord had warned the Israelites, "You must not establish friendly relations with them. If you do, they will surely shift your allegiance to their gods." But Solomon was irresistibly attracted to them. He had 700 royal wives and 300 concubines. His wives had a powerful influence over him. When Solomon became old, his wives shifted his allegiance to other gods. He was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God as his father David had been. Solomon worshipped the Sidonian goddess Astarte and the detestable Ammonite god Milcom. Solomon did evil in the Lord's sight. He did not remain loyal to the Lord like his father David had. Furthermore, on the hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for the detestable Moabite god Chemosh, and for the detestable Ammonite god Milcom. He built high places for all his foreign wives, so they could burn incense and make sacrifices to their gods. The Lord was angry with Solomon because he had shifted his allegiance away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him on 2 occasions, and had warned him about this very thing, so that he would not follow other gods. But he did not obey the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Because you insist on doing these things and have not kept the covenantal rules I gave to you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. However, for your father David's sake, I will not do this while you are alive. I will tear it away from your son's hand instead. But I will not tear away the entire kingdom. I will leave your son one tribe for my servant David's sake and for the sake of my chosen city, Jerusalem." The Lord brought against Solomon an enemy, Hadad the Edomite, a descendant of the Edomite king. During David's campaign against Edom, Joab, the commander of the army, while on a mission to bury the dead, killed every male in Edom. For 6 months, Joab and the entire Israelite army stayed there until they had exterminated every male in Edom. Hadad, who was only a small boy at the time, escaped with some of his father's Edomite servants and headed for Egypt. They went from Midian to Paran. They took some men from Paran and went to Egypt. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, supplied him with a house and food and even assigned him some land. Pharaoh, liked Hadad so well, he gave him his sister-in-law, Queen Taphanes' sister, as a wife. Taphanes' sister gave birth to a son, named Genubath. Taphanes raised him in Pharaoh's palace. Genubath grew up in Pharaoh's palace among Pharaoh's sons. While in Egypt, Hadad heard that David had passed away and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead. So Hadad asked Pharaoh, "Give me permission to leave so I can return to my homeland." Pharaoh said to him, "What do you lack here that makes you want to go to your homeland?" Hadad replied, "Nothing, but please give me permission to leave." God also brought against Solomon another enemy, Rezin, son of Eliada, who had run away from his master, King Hadadezer of Zobah. He gathered some men and organized a raiding band. When David tried to kill them, they went to Damascus, where they settled down and gained control of the city. He was Israel's enemy throughout Solomon's reign, and like Hadad, caused trouble. He loathed Israel and ruled over Syria. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, one of Solomon's servants, rebelled against the king. He was an Ephraimite from Zeradah, whose mother was a widow named Zeruah. This is what prompted him to rebel against the king. Solomon built a terrace, and he closed up a gap in the wall of the city of his father David. Jeroboam was a talented man. When Solomon saw that the young man was an accomplished worker, he made him the leader of the work crew from the tribe of Joseph. At that time, when Jeroboam had left Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, met him on the road. The two of them were alone in the open country. Ahijah was wearing a brand new robe, and he grabbed the robe and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he told Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces, for this is what the Lord God of Israel says. Look, I am about to tear the kingdom from Solomon's hand, and I will give 10 tribes to you. He will retain 1 tribe for my servant David's sake, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city I've chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. I am taking the kingdom from him, because they have abandoned me and worshipped the Sidonian goddess Astarte, the Moabite god Chemosh, and the Ammonite god Milcom. They have not followed my instructions by doing what I approve, and obeying my rules and regulations, like Solomon's father David did. I will not take the whole kingdom from his hand. I will allow him to be ruler for the rest of his life, for the sake of my chosen servant David, who kept my commandments and rules. I will take the kingdom from the hand of his son, and give 10 tribes to you. I will leave his son 1 tribe, so my servant David's dynasty may continue to serve me in Jerusalem, the city I've chosen as my home. I will select you. You will rule over all you desire to have, and you will be king over Israel. You must obey all I command you to do, follow my instructions, do what I approve, and keep my rules and commandments, like my servant David did. Then I will be with you, and establish for you a lasting dynasty, as I did for David. I will give you Israel. I will humiliate David's descendants because of this, but not forever. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam escaped to Egypt, and found refuge with King Shishak of Egypt. He stayed in Egypt until Solomon died. The rest of the events of Solomon's reign, including all his accomplishments and wise decisions, are recorded in the scroll called the Annals of Solomon. Solomon ruled over all Israel from Jerusalem for 40 years. Then Solomon passed away and was buried in the city of his father David. His son Rehoboam replaced him as king. Rehoboam traveled to Shechem, for all Israel had gathered in Shechem to make Rehoboam king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard the news, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon and had been living ever since. They sent for him, and Jeroboam and the whole Israelite assembly came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made us work too hard. Now, if you lighten the demands he made and don't make us work as hard, we will serve you. He said to them, Go away for 3 days, then return to me. So the people went away. King Rehoboam consulted with the older advisers who had served his father Solomon when he had been alive. He asked them, How do you advise me to answer these people? They said to him, Today, if you show a willingness to help these people and grant their request, they will be your servants from this time forward. But Rehoboam rejected their advice and consulted the young advisers who served him, with whom he had grown up. He asked them, How do you advise me to respond to these people who said to me, Lessen the demands your father placed on us? The young advisers with whom Rehoboam had grown up said to him, Say this to these people who have said to you, Your father made us work hard, but now lighten our burden. Say this to them, I am a lot harsher than my father. My father imposed heavy demands on you. I will make them even heavier. My father punished you with ordinary whips. I will punish you with whips that really sting your flesh. Jeroboam and all the people reported to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, just as the king had ordered when he said, Return to me on the 3rd day. The king responded to the people harshly. He rejected the advice of the older men and followed the advice of the younger ones. He said, My father imposed heavy demands on you. I will make them even heavier. My father punished you with ordinary whips. I will punish you with whips that really sting your flesh. The king refused to listen to the people because the Lord was instigating this turn of events so that he might bring to pass the prophetic announcement that had been made through Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam son of Nebat. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, the people answered the king, We have no portion in David, no share in this son of Jesse. Return to your homes, O Israel. Now look after your own dynasty, O David. So Israel returned to their homes. Rehoboam continued to rule over the Israelites who lived in the cities of Judah. King Rehoboam sent Adoniram, the supervisor of the work crews, out after them, but all Israel stoned him to death. King Rehoboam managed to jump into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the Davidic dynasty to this very day. Yeah, so here you have the end of King Solomon's reign, where it's summarized essentially that all of his many wives turned his allegiance away from God and got him serving other gods besides Yahweh. And some of these gods were really nasty, like the Ammonite god Milcom and the Moabite god Chemosh, who are given the adjective, for lack of a better word, detestable. And this is because they were gods that required human sacrifice. So, a very sad state of affairs, frankly, that Solomon, in all his wisdom, is led away to worship these horrible foreign gods, rather than the God who established him in his throne, and provided all of this material benefit for Solomon. So, the Lord lets Solomon know that because you insist on doing these things in 1 Kings 11:11, and have not kept the covenantal rules I gave you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Yeah, and this should be a warning for Solomon to wake up and to stop doing the evil that he's currently doing and to return to serve God with all of his heart. But it's not listed here that he does. And as further evidence that he does not, the kingdom is indeed ripped away from his son, Rehoboam. Then you see the various adversaries that were raised up against Solomon in his day. This Hadad the Edomite, who during David's time with Joab, apparently there was war against Edom, and Hadad escaped to Egypt. And you have Jeroboam, who was in charge of some of the forced labor for Solomon. And he apparently, despite being an Israelite, an Ephraimite in particular, he really despised, I guess, rebuilding the terrace. Well, built the terrace and the closing up of the gap in the wall of the city of his father David. Not sure why those two things in particular should have prompted rebellion out of Jeroboam, but they do. But Jeroboam is greeted by the prophet Ahijah, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah, Ahijah the Shilonite. And he physically demonstrates what several of the prophets, well, mainly Samuel, had demonstrated before, and that the kingdom would be torn, using the garment as an illustration here. And the 10 of the portions of the garment would be given to him. That is, the kingdom would be given to him, and the rest to David's descendants. But Jeroboam here is admonished to follow after the Lord, his God, like David did. However, Jeroboam doesn't heed this advice. And Solomon dies. And so King Rehoboam is enthroned in Shechem, and the people are asking Rehoboam to lessen their burdens because Solomon was a slave driver in the very literal sense, and it was tough under him. So they plead with Rehoboam to lessen the burden of the throne on them. And Jeroboam, son of Nebat, also comes to plead to Rehoboam about this. But Rehoboam doesn't listen to the advice of this older generation who admonish him not to respond harshly. He instead listens to the advice of the younger generation who are with him, who say, really crack down on him. So he really cracks down on them, and they all abandon him, except for the ones that are immediately with him. So they rebel pretty hard, so much so that when he sends Adoniram out to go get the work crews together, they kill him, and Rehoboam barely escapes with his life. So, interesting. One thing that stood out to me in the portion where you have Solomon's enemies being raised up is how often they are coming out of Egypt. And this despite the fact that Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter as part of like a alliance between him and Egypt. So it seems that despite all of the goodwill that might have brought, some of his major opposition is still coming out of Egypt. So what good did it do him, really? Solomon loved many foreign women. There are two obvious problems here. First, that he loved foreign women, this is from Guzik, by the way, who worshipped other gods and brought pagan influences to Israel. Second, that he loved many women, rejecting God's plan from the beginning for one man and one woman to become one flesh in marriage. Yeah, and again, against the law, the Levitical law, for the king not to gather for himself many women. Nations of whom the Lord God had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them." God gave a general warning to all Israel to not intermarry with these nations, because surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. For all Solomon's great wisdom, he did not have the wisdom to apply this simple command to his own life. Solomon probably did what many of us do. He somehow thought that he would be the exception, that he would escape the consequences of the sin, despite seeing how it affected others. Solomon learned, or should have learned, that he was not the exception to this rule. Solomon clung to these in love. At this point, Solomon wanted romance and sensual fulfillment more than he wanted the Lord. For all his wisdom, he was snared by the power of romantic and sensual love. He did not seriously consider that it is possible to be romantically and sensually attracted to people we have no moral or righteous reason to be attracted to. Once under the power of this attraction, he clung to these in love instead of giving them up to the Lord. Yeah. I think it's very important who we choose to be our partner. And the Bible warns us not to be unequally yoked. And here in the Old Testament, the Israelites were commanded not to marry foreign women. And the idea being that they should be set apart for God, rather than just anyone. So he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. This is an almost unbelievable number of marriage partners. His wives were considered princesses, but his concubines were legal partners without the same standing as wives. All said, Solomon had far more marriage partners than any man could possibly give attention to, sexual attention or other attention. In this sense, a concubine was a legal mistress. Many prominent men in the Old Testament had concubines. Examples include Abraham, Jacob, Caleb, Saul, David, and Rehoboam. Significantly, the Bible never shows this kind of family life blessed by God. We can say that Solomon had so many marriage partners because he followed the bad example of his father David, who had many wives and concubines himself. We can say that Solomon had so many marriage partners because of his own sexual lust. This is a profound and sobering example of the principle that if one wife is not enough to satisfy a man, then 1,000 wives will not be enough. When a man is unsatisfied with the woman God gave to him, the problem is with him, not with his wife. 1,000 women cannot satisfy the lust of man. Solomon should have listened to Proverbs 27:20. Hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. We can say that Solomon had so many marriage partners because of his lust for power and prestige. In those days, a large harem was a status symbol. It said to the world, "Look how many wives and children I can support. Look how many women I have authority over." Solomon's desire for worldly prestige led him to these ungodly marriages. Partly for his lust, which, being indulged, becomes infinite and unsatiable, and partly from his pride, accounting this a point of honor and magnificence from Poole. I'm sure also that there were marriages thrown in there for the sake of diplomacy, of having good relations between his nation and some other nation. But again, what did it profit him, frankly? In that these marriages for alliance diluted his own influence and made it so that he was beholden to these foreign nations. And his wives turned away his heart. Of course they did. Based upon the Song of Solomon, we can say that at the first Solomon seemed to know what true love was with one woman. Yet, his subsequent history shows us that it is possible to be in that place and depart from it. It is not true to say that love will keep us together. Solomon shows us that we can know true love and depart from it. It is better said that the blessing and power of God upon our obedience will keep us together. We don't know when Solomon added his second wife. When he did, it was easy for him to rationalize it. After all, the greatest king of Israel, his father David, had several wives and concubines. Yet, once he followed his father David into this departure from God's plan from the beginning, it was easy to keep adding wives. The two shall become one flesh. As he added wives, he broke the specific commandment God gave to the future kings of Israel in Deuteronomy 17:17. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Solomon did multiply wives for himself. By any account, 1,000 marriage partners is multiplication, and it did turn away his heart. It would have been useless to argue with Solomon for the claims of idols. He could at once, by his wisdom, have annihilated all infidel arguments and have established the existence and unity of God, but step by step, he was led by silken cords, a captive to the worship of other gods. From Meyer. The whole story of King Solomon is full of the most solemn value. His was a life full of promise, but it ended in failure and gloom, because his heart turned away from loyalty to God in response to the seductions of his sensual nature. From Morgan. When Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods. Age did not make Solomon wiser. He seemed to be wiser in his youth, and old age hardened the sinful tendencies that were present in his younger days. Age and experience should make us more godly and wise, but they do not automatically do so. His heart was not loyal to the Lord his God. Solomon is a contrast to those who did fully follow the Lord. This phrase is used in a positive sense of three men in the Old Testament, Joshua and Caleb, and here of David. Solomon was conspicuous as someone who did not wholly follow the Lord. As was the heart of his father David. Solomon had more than one wife, and David had more than one wife, 15 according to 1 Chronicles 3. David spiritually survived this failing, and Solomon did not survive it. From what we know of the world beyond from the story of Jesus in Luke 16, we can say that David was not yet in heaven, but in a place of blessing and comfort known as Abraham's bosom. If it were possible for someone in Abraham's bosom to see life on the earth and be sorry, David was very sorry when he saw Solomon and his sin. David no doubt hoped that his children would be better than he and find more victory in the areas of life that troubled him. Sadly, David's sons found less victory in controlling the lust of the flesh, and especially sexual lust. Yet David's sin did not turn his heart away from the Lord. It is possible for a particular sin and one person to be a hindrance that they would do better without, while in another person that sin is the cause of ruin. David's lack of romantic and sexual restraint hindered him. It destroyed Solomon. This is one reason why we must be so careful with the sin of stumbling another brother or sister. What might hinder us might destroy another person. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, after Milcom. Solomon built a high place for Chemosh and for Moloch. This seems almost unbelievable. We might not accept it unless the scriptures clearly stated it. This man of great heritage, wisdom, and blessing turns to the most depraved gods of the pagan nations. Probably, Solomon did not see this as denial of the Lord God of Israel. In his mind, he probably thought he still honored the Lord. He simply added the honor of these other gods to his honor of the Lord. But this is never acceptable to God. He demands to be the only God in our life. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. This is a tragic example of the power of the lust of the flesh. Because of lust, Solomon found himself in a place where he never thought he would find himself. He found himself burning incense at the altars of depraved pagan gods. He found himself at the altar of child sacrifice unto the god of Moloch. This is the power of lust. It can capture us in a spell, in a fog of spiritual confusion, until we do things we never thought we would do. He built altars and high places for these pagan gods as well, enabling the worship of these gods for other people. The reader should carefully consider, if this was the case with the wisest man who ever lived, then what hope do you have apart from constant dependence upon Jesus Christ? Let the example of Solomon drive you to greater dependence upon and abiding with Jesus. Ashtoreth is a deliberate distortion of Ashtart, the Canaanite fertility goddess. The revocalization is based on the word for shame from Patterson and Austell. That sort of Hebrew wordplay is also present in Baal-zebul, which is god of the house, to Baal-zebub, which is god of flies. So the Lord became angry with Solomon. God had special reason to be displeased with Solomon. He had appeared to him twice, and Solomon still went after other gods. Solomon's sin was base ingratitude and a waste of great spiritual privilege. We sometimes think that great spiritual experiences will keep us from sin, and that will keep us faithful to God. This was not the case with the wisest man who ever lived, and it will not be the case with us also. I've heard it said before that, if only God worked in more visually stunning ways like he did in the Old Testament, surely I would believe more type thing. But despite Solomon's experience with him being approached by God in a dream and being spoken to by God on multiple different occasions, Solomon's heart was still led astray by his own sin. And so too you have in the case of the Exodus, where the people are led out with a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day, and still they rebel. God works plenty visibly today, in that all of reality is held together by him. Every moment that we have is provided by him, and yet we still deny him. So our ability to rationalize and to just flat out reject God is large. I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. God promised the entire kingdom of Israel to the descendants of David forever, if they only remained obedient. David reminded Solomon of this promise shortly before his death. Yet, they could not remain faithful even for one generation. Solomon's kingdom was an outstanding example of wealth, military power, and prestige. Yet the true security of Israel did not rest in any of those things. It rested in the blessing of God and in the obedience and faithfulness of their king. I will not do it in your days. For the sake of your father David, I will tear it out of the hand of your son. For the sake of David, God delayed this judgment until after Solomon's generation. But the disobedience that brought the judgment came in the first generation. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David. Even in this great judgment, God must mingle undeserved mercy with deserved judgment. God announced that the kingdom will be divided, and part of it will be loyal to the descendants of David, and part of it will be under a different dynasty. Many other passages in the Old Testament, such as 2 Chronicles 11:12, tell us that the southern kingdom was made up of two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Several times in this chapter, the southern kingdom is referred to as one tribe. This is because either Benjamin is swallowed up in Judah, or the idea was one tribe in addition to Judah. Now the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. Solomon's reign was glorious, but God did not allow it to be completely without problems. He raised up adversaries like Hadad against Solomon. When he sent to Hiram to assist him in the building of the temple of the Lord, he could say, "There was no Satan, no accuser." But now that he had turned away from God, 3 Satans rise up against him at once: Hadad, Rezin, and Jeroboam from Clark. He was a descendant of the king in Edom. Hadad sought to avenge his conquered people. He found refuge and support in Egypt. "Let me depart, that I may go to my own country." We are not told specifically how Hadad troubled or was an adversary to Solomon, only that he returned to bother Solomon with the permission of Pharaoh. Despite the alliance between Solomon and Pharaoh via the marriage of his daughter, Pharaoh also gives one of his daughters to this Hadad and allows him to go and bother Solomon. So the net result for Solomon of his political marriage is that he has divided interests. And it certainly doesn't seem as though Pharaoh has Solomon's best interests in mind. So God raised up another adversary against him. As a reigning king, Solomon was remarkably successful, but he was not a superman, as God allowed an adversary from the south. So God also raised up another adversary against Solomon. God knew that Solomon needed some kind of adversary, and he knew how many adversaries Solomon needed. Rezin, the son of Eliada, the adversary, came from the north. God allowed adversaries to come against Solomon from both north and south. In some ways, men and women are shaped by their adversaries, and especially by their response to those adversaries. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite. Jeroboam was different from the 2 previously mentioned adversaries of Solomon because he was a fellow Israelite, from the north, from the south, and from within. This is what caused him to rebel against the king. Solomon had built the Milo and repaired the damages to the city of David. It is not immediately apparent why these construction projects caused him to rebel against Solomon. Jewish traditions say he opposed the oppressive use of forced labor in these building projects. Since he was the officer over all the labor force, this tradition makes some sense. According to Dilday, the name Jeroboam means, "May the people be great." He was perhaps a populist leader. Though only presenting the people's petition, it is nevertheless probable that Jeroboam was not idle, but like an artful politician, busy behind the scenes, till the coveted crown became his. From Knapp. And Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor. This made him a more dangerous adversary of Solomon. Take for yourself 10 pieces. In this acted out prophecy, Ahijah showed Jeroboam that he would lead 10 tribes of a divided Israel after the death of Solomon. It was indeed a shock for Rehoboam and the tribe of Judah to be reduced overnight from the most powerful tribe in an illustrious and world-renowned kingdom to a small state that was soon stripped of what wealth it had left. From Patterson and Austell. Because they have forsaken me. God promised to divide Israel and put 10 of the 12 tribes under Jeroboam as judgment for the sin and idolatry of Solomon. God would still keep one tribe under the house of David in faithfulness to his promise to David. This is the first we hear of the divided kingdom, which became Israel's history for hundreds of years after the death of Solomon. At this first description, we would expect that the 10 tribes under Jeroboam would be larger, greater, and more enduring than the one tribe left unto the house of David. As it worked out, just the opposite happened, because the 10 tribes forsook the Lord, while the one tribe was more obedient. Not perfectly obedient by any means. I will take you, and you shall reign over all your heart desires, and you shall be king over Israel. God ordained the division of Israel and the reign of Jeroboam. He did this as a judgment, a great judgment, upon Solomon for his embrace of idolatry. Then I will be with you and build for you an enduring house. This was an amazing offer. God promised to make a lasting dynasty for Jeroboam if he would do what is right in the sight of the Lord. An obedient Jeroboam had the opportunity to establish a parallel dynasty to the house of David. Both Jeroboam and David were appointed by God to follow after disobedient kings. David waited upon the Lord to make the throne clear, and God blessed his reign. Jeroboam did not wait on the Lord, but made his own way to the throne, and God did not bless his reign. Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam. This is another startling evidence of Solomon's decline. God specifically said that this would happen after the death of Solomon, and in judgment of Solomon's apostasy. Solomon didn't want to hear it, so he sought to kill Jeroboam. Solomon thought that he could defeat God's will in this, but he was unsuccessful. God's word through Ahijah proved true. It's interesting, too, that this seems to parallel Saul, in that when it was said to Saul that he would take the kingdom away from Saul and give it to someone else, Saul, rather than repenting and returning to the Lord, sought to kill David, who was the anointed one after him. However, and likewise here, Solomon, rather than seeking to return to the Lord, instead seeks to kill Jeroboam. The period that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. Many commentators believe that Solomon began his reign when he was about 20 years old. This means that Solomon did not live a particularly long life. This means that the promise made in 1 Kings 3:14 was not fulfilled to Solomon because of his disobedience. That is, so if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. His days were not lengthened, therefore he did not walk in the commands and the statutes as his father David did. When we consider the excess in which he lived, and the criminal passions which he must have indulged among his 1,000 wives, and their idolatrous and impure worship, this life was as long as could be reasonably expected. From Clark. Then Solomon rested with his fathers. This does not necessarily mean that Solomon died a saved man. It is a familiar phrase used in 1 and 2 Kings, used 25 times, and was used of such wicked kings as Ahab. It simply means that Solomon passed to the world beyond. We cannot say with certainty that he is in heaven. The last look at the life of Solomon in 1 Kings leads us to believe that he died in apostasy. There is no hopeful or cheerful end to the story in this account. If he did repent, yet the silence of the scriptures about it in this history was not without wise reasons, as among others, that his eternal condition being thus far left doubtful, his example might have the greater influence for the terror and caution of future offenders. From Poole. However, it may be that Solomon was shown special mercy for the sake of David his father. If that promise also applies to Solomon as well as the Messiah, some also believe that Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes at the very end of his life as a renunciation of his fall into vanity. Yeah, and certainly Ecclesiastes shows remorse, so perhaps. But 1 Kings here doesn't give us any indication that he repented. And surely it had been better for Solomon to have been buried alive than thus to have miscarried in his old age, and to the great dishonor of God and offense of his people Israel. From Trapp. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. This was a logical continuation of the Davidic dynasty. Solomon succeeded David, and now Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, was assumed to be the next king. Rehoboam was the only son of Solomon that we know by name. Solomon had 1,000 wives and concubines, yet we read of one son he had to bear up his name, and he was a fool. This demonstrates that sin is a bad way of building up a family. It is difficult to believe that he had no other sons, yet it is a fact that Rehoboam is the only one mentioned, from 1 Chronicles 3:10. Nap. Shechem was a city with rich history. Abraham worshipped there. Jacob built an altar and purchased land there. Joseph was buried there. It was also the geographical center of the northern tribes. All in all, it showed that Rehoboam was in a position of weakness, having to meet the 10 northern tribes on their territory, instead of demanding that representatives come to Jerusalem. I'm just reminded of something in the Islamic tradition. It said that Solomon slept with a bunch of his wives in one night, yet because he didn't say, Inshallah, that is, God wills it, he didn't have any sons. I see this as a gross perversion of the fact that Solomon didn't turn to God. He didn't have the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, first and foremost in his mind, and his loyalties were divided. When Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard it, Jeroboam was mentioned previously in 1 Kings 11:26-40. God told him through a prophet that he would rule over a portion of a divided Israel. Naturally, Jeroboam was interested in Solomon's successor. He was specifically part of the group of elders that addressed Rehoboam. Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burdensome service of your father. Solomon was a great king, but he took a lot from the people. The people of Israel wanted relief from the heavy taxation and forced service of Solomon's reign, and they offered allegiance to Rehoboam if he agreed to do this. God warned Israel about this in 1 Samuel 8:10-19, when through Samuel he spoke of what a king would take from Israel. After the warning, the people still wanted a king, and now they knew what it was like to be ruled by a taking king. Sadly, the elders of Israel made no spiritual demand or request on Rehoboam. Seemingly, the gross idolatry and apostasy of Solomon didn't bother them at all. Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived. Wisely, Rehoboam asked the counsel of these older, experienced men. They seemed to advise Solomon well, so it was fitting that Rehoboam asked for their advice. If you will be a servant to these people today, then they will be your servants forever. The elders knew that Rehoboam was not Solomon, and could not expect the same from the people that Solomon did. Rehoboam had to relate to the people based on who he was, not on who his father was. If he showed kindness and a servant's heart to the people, they would love and serve him forever. This was good advice. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him, and consulted the young men. Before Rehoboam ever consulted with the younger men, he rejected the advice of the elders. It isn't especially fun advice that the older generation gave to him. Be a servant to the people. I don't want to be a servant to the people. I want them to serve me. I'm the king type thing. But if he wouldn't, he wouldn't be king. At least not to the entire nation here. This is a common phenomenon today, what some people call advice shopping. The idea is that you keep asking different people for advice until you find someone who will tell you what you want to hear. This is an unwise and ungodly way to get counsel. It is better to have a few trusted counselors you will listen to even when they tell you what you don't want to hear. And he consulted the young men who had grown up with him. These men were much more likely to tell Rehoboam what he already thought, by turning to those likely to think just as he did. It shows that Rehoboam only asked for advice for the sake of appearance. Their unwise advice shows the wisdom of seeking counsel from those outside our immediate situation and context. Sometimes an outsider can think more clearly than those who share our same experiences. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. The young men offered the opposite advice to the elders. They suggested an adversarial approach, one that would make Rehoboam more feared than Solomon was. Solomon asked a lot of Israel, in both taxes and service. Yet we don't have the impression that Israel followed Solomon out of fear, but out of a sense of shared vision and purpose. They believed in what Solomon wanted to do, and were willing to sacrifice to accomplish it. Rehoboam did not appeal to any sense of shared vision and purpose. He simply wanted the people to follow his orders out of fear of the tyrant. With a dozen rash words, Rehoboam, the bungling dictator, opened the door for 400 years of strife, weakness, and eventually the destruction of the entire nation. From Dilday. Yeah. It's interesting, too, how the actions of a few, particularly of those in power, can mangle up what was a beautiful vision. So the king did not listen to the people. In this case, Rehoboam clearly should have listened to the people. This is not to say that a leader should always lead by popular vote, but a leader needs the wisdom to know when what the people want is actually best for them. Rehoboam was a fool. Ironically, his father Solomon worried about losing all the work for all he had worked for under a foolish successor. From Ecclesiastes 2, verses 18 and 19. Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether or not he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. For the turn of events was from the Lord. God managed this whole series of events, but he did not make Rehoboam take this unwise and sinful action. God simply let Rehoboam alone, and allowed him to make the critical errors his sinful heart wanted to make. Notice also, dear friends, that God is in events which are produced by the sin and the stupidity of men. This breaking up of the kingdom of Solomon into two parts was the result of Solomon's sin and Rehoboam's folly, yet God was in it. This thing is from me, saith the Lord. God had nothing to do with the sin or the folly, but in some way which we can never explain, in a mysterious way in which we are to believe without hesitation, God was in it all. From Spurgeon. Yeah. What share have we in David? Rehoboam's foolishness made Israel reject not only Rehoboam, but also the entire dynasty of David. They rejected the descendants of Israel's greatest king. And King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was in charge of the revenue, but all Israel stoned him with stones. Apparently, Rehoboam did not take the rebellions seriously until this happened. When his chief tax collector was murdered, he knew that the 10 tribes were serious about their rebellion. Adoram was the wrong man for Rehoboam to send. He was famous for his harsh policy of forced labor. From 1 Kings 4:6. And Ishar was over the household of Adoniram, the son of Abda, was over the tribute. And 5:14, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month by courses. A month they were in Lebanon, and 2 months at home, and Adoniram was over the levy, regarding the forced labor. Rehoboam probably sent Adoram because he wanted to make good on his promise to punish those who opposed him. His tough guy policy didn't work out. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. From this point on, in the history of Israel, the name Israel referred to the 10 northern tribes, and the name Judah referred to the southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah. There was a long-standing tension between the 10 northern tribes and the combined group of Judah and Benjamin. There were 2 earlier rebellions along this line of potential division in the days after Absalom's rebellion, which developed into the rebellion of Sheba. Rehoboam ought to have been thankful that God's love to David had left him even 2 tribes from Nap. Yeah, so I think there's a lot that we can learn from this. First, that our secret sins will take more than we wanted them to take. They'll go farther than we wanted them to go, and they can have wide-reaching effects beyond what we initially even thought they were. In David's case, he had a problem with lust, which blossomed into this horrific flower of Solomon's ravenous appetite. And I think it's important that we turn to God, to obey Him fully, and not to satisfy our own lusts. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day and a Merry Christmas. Bye.